How's it going? Doing well. Yeah, as soon as I saw North Carolina, what's going on? That's
Still watching.
yeah.
Hmm.
Your T-Dot or?
No, it's all. But we included it in the higher yards. Where they-
Yeah.
It's just, they've hit everything that could possibly go wrong. Gone wrong. Murphy's Law, actually. That's one residence.
Oh, yeah.
It's working on. The next part, septic, he's not in the city of Smith. He's not in extent, so it's a septic. Which then back
I didn't watch anything. I woke up about 12:30.
line, which he knocked out, he's got some sort of high powered hydro something.
It's online.
That's-
It is where everything is.
Yeah.
All the others. And like,
People are sticking on me. I'm like, at this point, I feel like we are too.
they haven't
I
been
think
sent.
it's all accident. I mean, it's, it's pure accident.
I voted. I just. No. Yeah.
I can help you answer some of
It's like
this.
the ones that didn't have any ballot initiative, it was straight. So it's-
How many questions you end
Yeah.
up getting, the cards?
I saw Emery's email yesterday. It looked like about 5 questions.
Okay, they're probably fairly similar.
They seem, yeah.
So far, I think we're okay. We only have Buckner Lane in there.
Got,
You guys expect?
Private development.
well,
No, I'm.
what would be harder to predict are the workshops that start the Tuesday after.
South,
Labor
and
Day
what we
and the
did is
first
we split
day.
it to 2 segments, so the construction would overlap, and we could get part of it done and not have to wait until we got all the right of way. So we have Buckner Lane South North and Buckner Lane South
You know,
South.
we're
And a Buckner Lane.
prepared for
$230.
On the south, we have 4 left to get.
So that's the new one too. That's the color one. Oh, I did. I looked in the packet. I realized I didn't.
Like it's supposed to be.
There was an
And
issue.
we're- hopefully we
The
can-
tip amendments
to go condemnation.
should be a 9.
So.
So right here,
That didn't occur at all.
the first, it's the very, it says just 6-0.
Yeah, staff did a good job.
All the math is correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
I'll make a
they,
note of that when we're doing it, but just so.
people left wishing.
I realized I was writing down all our financials and I was like, that doesn't make sense.
That's why,
Missing a number.
the workshops are where they can talk to each other and, that's not the right forum.
We had right away for every.
Extra amendments.
5 minutes, but
Exactly.
some people are always frustrated by that, but.
Months out, 9 months out.
Well, we're doing Rutherford,
Very
Thompson,
sensitive.
and both of these.
No.
Community.
No, we
We don't
didn't
want to
do
grow
that.
in areas.
But we are still following like T-Dot procedures, like, yeah, right. It's not T-Dot certified right away. And so I told
Okay,
them.
packet.
Yeah.
We're still gonna follow the best.
Well, and then of course, I mean, it's good
And
policy to try to drive that growth back to the UGVs.
we did appraisal on every single one of them.
It's a complex
Still
issue.
follow every single.
People do look at their property.
We did Duplex Road, we had 4 that we had to
We ran,
relocate.
we have a really cool map that we did for Rutherford.
I
We'll do it
went
for
to,
Wilson, but
we were working with Leslie.
Marketability.
She was the attorney then.
Developability. And then we did quadrant analysis.
John.
Marketability was large lots, relatively cheap.
Well, we went to her, we met like a month, every month, but anyway, I went to her and we got special burn permits. Because the right of way, we bought it, but it was in the name of the state, because duplex is a state road. And so one of the houses we couldn't do any
Transportation is.
city asbestos and the CDA lines and stuff were over. it.
Places that are hard to develop.
The other one, we needed to like, the
Places
that
that
training in
The high test drawings
Like,
you
we had 3 weekends in a row. The
So
duplex road, completely, we brought in.
else it shows you, where there's.
Brought in, like our firefighters trained, and we brought in any area, like volunteer.
That, the fact is, indicated,
That,
yeah,
so kids
yeah.
lumber.
seems like it would be.
And so we did 3
And it's enough canvas for, of course, it's like a
About
farm in
2,700
an area of shallow.
training. And our guys, and then they were like, does anybody want to dress how to go in? And I was like, absolutely. So I dressed out, went into the building while it was burning, and, it was really cool. So, Dr. Lane, the firefighters were like.
And then we've got some areas that are
But then the Alexander Farm,
highly developable.
they had a house on there.
Are preserved.
So they did the whole burn permit, special burn permit liability, and they let us.
Plus your subdivision, you know.
Line it, put it out, line it out. So that's what we did with the one duplex.
It's basically just a getting public feedback over the next couple of months. The
So when they
planning
come,
commission will probably.
then we do Buckner Road, I think we'll have to relocate a couple of the fire departments. No, it's gonna be several more years.
Wilson is just like.
Yeah, it was,
Mine is.
The idea to do that.
well, we were talking about burning them,
So Tom's out.
and I
out.
said,
That's all I saw.
I was like, no, because they're not in our name.
Kevin, Rich be there, and Doug DeMossi. All together, it's like, I mean, they're.
Was leaving. I was like.
They're like the light.
That's what I was saying.
Well, and you know, obviously Joe.
I sent the original request. It wasn't the modification, I was trying to do an amendment.
Yeah.
It was
I have it here.
Punish them, you know, making them.
How often do they get a chance for that training, right? That's not something.
The last one was like.
Leaving you alone.
Yeah, he's been kind of gone, you know, so.
Came back to his hair. He's looking youthful, well
It's like he's
rested.
45.
his episodes, and as one of these
Did he dress
extreme.
up?
He did, he dressed out, they put him in, they intros. So that was really cool. Like,
He was our longest.
oh, yeah.
I think on the public comments today, that was like, so we can just.
I was like, oh, wow, I can check this off the board as never having done. I was like,
If you want to say something, you can, just, I'll say it, I'm going to basically modify it slightly. Thank you.
So for the, tell me when the next board meeting is.
That is.
Okay.
plus all those small ones that all those trucks.
And then
Had water
I
fans.
just want to clarify. Make sure to be at that.
On the very bottom one. Yeah, just in the notes. This is all correct. Okay. The note was not correct.
Yeah, but you're not picturing all the ears, all dressed out and.
Other small error.
I had the air pack, everything.
And that first is East Division Street. It needs to put.
But even because they to know what building.
Instead of just, it's only term nine, I forgot. Oh, okay. The way, I misread the email. That's. So, east.
Fire.
Oh, no, from west of North Mountain Road. Yeah, okay, that's the change. So we did the one term nine, we said east of, and then.
That.
Good, Matt. How are you?
Board meeting.
Big election
That
last night.
kind of, well, like,
My ear, like something.
they just have an additional.
Get it.
No.
Because they let the kids drive on, get on the fire trucks, and they gave out hats, and there was food trucks, then. that put it together.
That's what we currently have, like, kind of ready in the background. And then something more specific, you're saying, like,
Is that a big relief or is it a big,
Both.
burden?
It is both. I've been very anxious about the whole thing
awesome. I'll make sure.
up to this point, and now I'm still anxious. So
What was the final tally? I went to
it was,
2-1.
it was like,
Oh,
yeah,
awesome.
it ends up being about a 30% of all the counts.
Uh,
Yeah, it was very encouraging. So we are
Some of this
beyond
process.
happy.
I want to like.
But I think we're gonna have this.
I too went to bed. I waited for the number to come in and the mayor to do his speech. And then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to bed because presidential, what it will be.
I knew that wasn't gonna be a quick move.
No.
Or at least a couple hours.
And I won't even have that until maybe this day or tomorrow.
Good.
End of week. I mean, but they've already sometimes said the math is fair.
Yeah.
This week,
We're, our
I got
design.
planning commission meeting tonight, so it's kind of hard to.
We're design.
And then a lot of.
Some planning and
It's that.
design.
It's we worship here.
And then the preferred alternative. The actual time was written. That was thinking that they would, like, they would approve.
They're about 18.
Oh,
Right. Well,
Yeah, we're not in agreement with what y'all are recommending.
it's.
And we can have a sidebar meeting And that, which I think will be okay. It's not any. Where we go.
It's just,
So I just think maybe a side for Catherine to understand, and then if we don't have place, then just I'll give the mayor the reasons why we're not in this.
We had a lady, with, in the summer.
At least wait for him.
Specific.
I've never dealt with, nothing. You're welcome.
He was also interested in being appointed by the.
The 3MG. I know what that was.
Nashville News is now the title for it. So, in the National.
Bless you guys.
In the National News process, we are actually going to be exploring the entire major collectively.
Mayor was.
We're gonna be tying that back to. Tying it back to the motion.
I feel like you should have the mayor saying on next one.
In the
Residential.
some areas, now that the referendum was passed, we have major corridors where we want to actually up the zoning. And then some of the roads that are side roads to it, we want to add as arterials to that. Add as, those roads are arterials. Not really. And I'm not sure I want to downgrade or upgrade or anything from an arterial or to a minor. Well, you would not have like a collector. That's what staff told me.
So they,
Oh.
the way.
Two, when you had 3 seats.
That's very, very.
But only, they had the 1 through 19.
Yeah.
So there was not urban, he made his whole difference between major and minor. So this census designated they have to be maintained for
Two number of people now.
it either has to be one or the other. They say it's gonna make it good, the feds are gonna make it good.
It's fine, but I didn't realize that. I would like to have had the conversation, Max, before y'all decided whether it's gonna be a major or a max, a minor or a max.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed.
Call the committee to order, transportation coordinating committee to order. I was just trying. No, you're good. I'm trying to be polite, but
I would like to have a conversation about whether it stays as a major or a minor.
so I've been informed we do have a quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. Just inform everybody, we are still having the hybrid option. It looks like we do have several people joining us online. Just let everybody know that anybody who wants to participate online, just please do so through the chat. You may not be able to hear everyone speak from the room, but should be able to hear the speakers clearly. As always, staff's helping us communicate through the chat. So any questions we have online, just communicate through the chat and staff will be glad to put stuff in there. First off, first item really called to order and approval of meeting minutes. So if I entertain a motion for any approval of meeting minutes from our last meeting. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Let's see. Public comments. I'll open the floor up for any public comments. Anyone wishing to speak before the TCC? Seeing none, I will close the period of public comments, but just remind anyone that they can also submit any comments to the gnc.org. All right, and moving on to action items. Let's see, first item is item 3A, amend the transportation improvement program for cycle A. I'll turn it over to Taylor Lee.
Hey, Jonathan. What to know, the TIP is a short range program that covers a 4-year span. It lists all regionally significant and federally funded transportation projects in the NPO planning area. Must be consistent with our long range plan, the RTP. It's basically constrained by federal appropriations or estimated revenues. The current TIP was adopted November 22, and it accounts for approximately 1.7. That's almost $2 billion now. And then we have an interactive TIP map available at the link, gnrc.org/TIP. Here's our proposed TIP amendments today. The first one is, First one is East Division Street widening. This amendment proposes to change the project termini from north of Mount Juliet Road, say 171 to Golden Bear Parkway, to And this says, I'll have to add this, it should be west of North Mount Juliet Road to east of Rutland Drive. This termini update is to reflect the tapering going from a 4-lane to a 2-lane road on both ends of the termini. There's only a termini revision, no funds have changed this time. Next is Walton Ferry and Old Shackle Island Road Improvements Project. This amendment adds a little bit under $5.8 million of federal USDPG dollars to the fiscal year 25 construction phase to cover cost overruns. Next is the Electrify Nashville. It's a new project adding to the TIP. It's adding about $3 million of federal CFI, so charging and fueling infrastructure funds to the TIP. Then also the total project cost for this is just under $6 million. Next, we have another termini revision for East Nashville backbones. So this amendment revises the project termini to Union Street from 3rd Avenue, North 1st Avenue North, Woodland Street from 1st Avenue North to South 11th Street, South 5th Street from Main Street to Davidson Street, and South 10th Street from Main Street to Spear Street. And it updates the project termini length from 3.8 to 3.44 miles. The next 3 projects are all in Smyrna Laverne. We're just swapping out a total of roughly $1.2 million of MSTGBG Murfreesboro funding with USTBG funding. So it's a direct swap. So the first one we have here is the Florence Road sidewalks in Smyrna. So it's replacing roughly $300,000 of Murfreesboro STBG with an equivalent amount of USTBG funds for fiscal year 23 and 26 construction. Or right away, excuse me, 23 right away and 26 construction. Next one is Jefferson Pike widening. This is in Laverne. This project is replacing roughly $700,000 in federal MSTBG funds with an equivalent amount of USTBG for fiscal year 26 NEPA and design. And the last one that we're doing a swap on is the Lowry Street Improvement Phase 2 in Smyrna. This was replacing about $200,000 of federal MSTBG funds with an equivalent amount of USTBG. All of these funds for these projects, the total amount of 1.2, will be made available for projects in the Murfreesboro urbanized area. The next 2 projects are for the state of Gallatin. It's removing approximately $5.7 million of program construction funds from the project. The total project cost staying the same. The award is not being affected. It's just removing the program line. And the note there, Gallatin will just reach out to the CMAQ office in the future when they get to construction to reprogram those funds. So the first one is Lock 4 multi-use trail. This is removing roughly $3.1 million in federal CMAQ from fiscal year 26 construction. Like I said, this when the project is getting closer to construction, the city of Gallatin will reach back out to the air quality office to get the funds added back to the TIP. And similarly, citywide sidewalk improvements phase 2 for Gallatin. This is removing $2.6 million of CMAQ dollars from fiscal years 26 construction, and Gallatin will just need to reach out to the air quality office to get those funds added back into the TIP when they're closer to construction. And that's all the amendments we have.
Thank you, Taylor. Any questions for staff? Yes, sir.
The Smyrna and Laverne projects, is that because of the different urban areas?
Yeah, they originally were in the Murfreesboro urbanized area, and when those funds are programmed, so we're just kind of reflecting that the Murfreesboro, since they're no longer in the area, we're just replacing them with the national urbanized area funds.
Any other questions? All right, can I get a motion for approval of this, all these amendments to the TIP to endorse? Thank you. Second?
Yep.
All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next action item is functional classification revisions, and I'll introduce Max Baker.
All right, thank you. I apologize for my soft voice today. I lost it over the weekend, so I won't be projecting as well as I usually do. Just to catch everybody up, functional classification system provides a framework for identifying the role that roadways play and informs roadway design for federal opportunities. This is updated soon after the census designations come out for urban areas and then the subsequent federal aid urban boundary, which you remember earlier this year, we updated that. The next step is updating your functional classification to address any issues that might arise from that change. The schedule that we've been going through started back in the summer and reached out to local staff to understand what changes you might want to have us consider forwarding on to the Department of Transportation. Also, we did a desktop review ourselves, looking at some of the changes that have occurred over the last decade in terms of what classifications are and are not allowed anymore. And hopefully we will be able to send the list of revisions to Department of Transportation with approval by the Transportation Policy Board later this month. And then TDOT will submit it on to Federal Highway at the end of. So quick overview of all the revisions that we're proposing for submittal to TDOT, and some of them are locally submitted. Some of them were submitted through our desktop review. The locally submitted ones, they typically happened in reaction to quickly growing areas. So where we saw volumes increasing or new roadway capacity added to the network, that's where the functionality changes, or a new roadway that had no functional classification needed to be. Quickly, you can kind of scroll back and forth between. So this is what they were previously, and then what the recommended changes were. Those designations were identified through conversations that we would have talking about locally, local conditions. So if there was something that we needed to be aware of in terms of volume that we may not have record of, that would have gone into our consideration. Also, connectivity. That's something that Federal Highway is really stressing this go around. So I believe the rule is a roadway cannot be connected, or has to be connected to a classification at or above what it currently is. When looking at the regional review, so that's where myself and my team sat down and did the desktop review. One of the big things that we looked at, and this is what was suggested to us by Tennessee Department of Transportation, is 10 years ago when we did this process, there was an urban collector. So there was no designation between major and minor collector. This go around, there is that opportunity. So we had to go through the process of identifying which of those collectors needed to be classified as minor, which needed to be major. We were given loose guidelines by TDOT of 3,000 ADT and about a 3-mile threshold to set that major versus minor. We didn't strictly follow those, but they were our general guidelines in terms of starting to look at it. Other things that we looked at were network connectivity, which I spoke to earlier, the artifacts at the urban boundary. So where an urban boundary changed as a result of the census, or if there was some odd change between, say, a major arterial and a minor arterial that was just set at some arbitrary urban boundary that was set, we just took this opportunity to go ahead and clean those up. Obviously, new constructed segments. I think the only one that I can remember us adding, Jonathan, would be in your area. So the Mac Hatcher Northwest, we just went ahead and continued it on. So quickly looking at the changes, as you can see, there's a lot of major collectors there that we identified as minor collectors. What's missing from this map is also there are still a considerable amount of major collectors. They typically want a 50-50 split in terms of major versus minor, and collectors in general are supposed to make up about 30% of your total network, just for context. So I'll flip back a couple times. There were a couple of instances, I know one in Brentwood and one was in Nashville, where there was basically a finger network. So it didn't connect to anything else that we recommended just to come off of the federal system. And you can see in Rutherford County, there were a couple of those urban boundary artifacts that I was speaking to that were just kind of cleaned up. We urge you to go to gnrc.org/maps/federal aid. This is an interactive map. You can switch on and off the layers, look at what it was previously classified as, what we're recommending. Encourage you to reach out to us and have any conversations in preparation of the TPP meeting later this month.
Well, Max, maybe I want to point of emphasis on what we had to do with the collectors within the urban area. So previously there was just the urban collector. That was the classification. Once the urban designation was technically removed from the functional classification itself, what TDOT did, I believe, was just default all urban collectors to major collectors. And so we're not really in a position to recommend that be the status quo. So Max's team went in and identified which of those that defaulted to major collectors needed to be classified as a minor.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks for the clarification. With that.
Any questions for Max? Right. All right. I'll entertain a motion to endorse functional classification revisions for the TPB. Got a motion? Second? Got a second. Any discussion?
I have one point of discussion, and Matt helped me out here. So just wanted to be clear that TPB doesn't have the authority to make these changes. They're just going to be approving the request that will be forwarded on to TDOT. You want to speak to the process that you'll use to make the final determination that goes to Federal Highway?
So, the balancing act of functional classification has to do with accessibility and mobility. And we try to, there is a percentage of each functional classification that needs to be honored through that. So if there are changes in one category that offset that percentage, it has to be adjusted in other places. So it needs to maintain that percentage of, and that hierarchy of mobility down to accessibility. That is what our team does after the requests have been handed to us. Then we work with Federal Highway on the what that final list of changes are, and then it gets approved. And I mean, that's in a nutshell how it works. If there's anything else that you want as far as specifics, I don't know, Sean, you want to say anything on?
What if you're not in an agreement with what TDOT decides that goes to Federal Highway
I
Administration?
mean, as far as not in agreement.
You're not in agreement with how a road is classified on the functional classification map.
Well, that is what this board is supposed to be deciding. The agreement should be done before it comes to us. What happened, like, again, and the conversation should include us when it comes to what the percentages are expected to be. So we don't have these cases of disagreement before it gets to Federal Highway.
Okay. So I guess my thing is that if we are not in agreement with some of the way that the classification was distributed from the urban to a major or minor, we need to fix it here first before it moves forward to y'all. And what if we can't get to an agreement?
And, I mean, we really don't do much without an endorsement from the board.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Now, I do want to say something else too, and this is sort of a soapbox conversation, is that, Max, you mentioned a little bit that some of the conversation about the changes have to do with volumes and things that have changed based on new developments that come into the scene. I do want to stress that for some reason, and this is not always in Middle Tennessee, but it's just kind of all over the state, is that TDOT seems to be one of the last people to know about large developments that happen in areas that could affect state routes. And really, I'm trying to be more proactive in how we deal with these things instead of hearing about it from the news and the press and angry people who are stuck in traffic. I do want to stress that when you are working on developments that have a state route involvement or you think are going to be impacting a state route, let's talk about that much earlier than we have been, because it is really getting difficult to try to defend things that we don't really know much about until the final, the last minute. And so that's just a request from me on behalf of the TDOT planning group.
So on that, Matt, do we have the team reach out to you, or is there someone specific on your team that manages it from that development perspective?
You can start with me. I will most likely have, get the region involved to make sure that we're discussing that from the traffic impacts. I would like at some point when our restructuring starts to settle and planning is past the epic restructuring to put together some type of loose policy or an agreement of how we do this. So we don't have to have the defense always of things that we don't really had much input in. So.
Well, I know we do that, but I think we probably need to get a little bit further ahead than we are today. So I'll go back and share that.
And back to the issue of functional classification, though, there's still time to influence what goes to TDOT. But we're compelled to make recommendations to deal with the urban collector issue, and we can't simply just ignore that and just leave everything as a major collector. That's not a logical network, and that's the test that TDOT and Federal Highway are going to be applying as they review our submission. So we can sit down at the table and look at every route and every recommendation we've made, but we can't ignore that responsibility that we have to assess the network.
And I guess that was my question, is that if you get to a point where we cannot agree, what is the next step and getting to that? I mean, to just say you have to split it and make it 50-50 when really maybe your function is not operating in that
I'm
way.
happy to sit down with you and walk you through every single revision that we are recommending. But the idea that we just leave them all as major collectors is
No,
not something we're going to recommend.
No, I agree with that. I'm not, that's not what I'm saying. It's just that if you had taken something and that was an urban and said, this is a major and this is a minor, but we feel like this needs to be a major,
Yeah, that's
but it doesn't get us that percentage that everybody's looking for in the pyramid of roadway classification.
general.
What is that discussion that needs to happen, that this is actually what's going to be happening in our community?
Our intent is not to have a disagreement. Our intent is to take what you see as the functional classification and recommend that to TDOT. Now, they may kick it back to us, but
Don't do that, Matt.
in all the conversations that we've had with our local members, I mean, we take what their suggestions are, we have a conversation about it, and we move forward.
Okay.
So we're definitely open to having that conversation. I did want to note on another part of the state process. So they will be making recommendations. I think what Joe Roach just told me is they typically respond to revisions in the MPO area, but don't make suggestions. However, in the rural area, they will make suggestions. So we still may be, considering other
And it's
changes.
for that percentage. It's to make sure that it fits within those percentages that were established in there. I think it's in that document that you have in front of you about what the percentages might be or yep. I saw that when I walked by.
So the other thing I just wanted to make clear, I think I have this understanding correct, but please put me on the right path if not. But, urban collectors were all eligible, federal aid eligible. When we had major and minor collectors in the rural areas, major collectors in the rural areas were federal aid eligible for capacity improvements. All routes are generally eligible for safety type improvements. For the reclassification from urban collector to major and minor collectors in urban areas, the minor collectors also are federal aid eligible.
Fed aid eligible and follow the same typical cross-section at TDOT.
So the practical distinction here is more just on making sure that the orientation of the roadway is accurately reflected.
For HPMS reporting, honestly.
Back when I was in the Nashville MPO, there were a lot of roads that we would see that had a ton of driveway cuts that were identified as arterials. And that's really not, they're conflicting with each other because you can't have mobility when you have all of these driveway cuts. So those are the things that used to drive me nuts when it came to the way that they had been classified.
And I do like the idea of narrowing down. I mean, because there isn't an unlimited amount of money to do all of these different things and every spur off of, something off of a federal highway. So I like the idea of narrowing some of these things down where we're not, making the inclusion so broad, it basically is everything. I think it's going to be helpful for like what this is doing. It's going to be helpful in future decisions where we're looking to put limited resources, having a little bit more limited number of choices of where those federal resources can go. So I think it's actually a pretty good thing. I know it could be to the detriment of a individual community by not kind of stretching it out a little bit further. But overall, I think it would be more effective in long term in our transportation plan. So I appreciate the effort to do that.
Any additional discussion?
Do we need to move this on, or do we need more time to look at it from other communities now? Are you-
No, you can move it on. We're not going to support it though, because we're not where we feel we.
Well, if we
But
could
I would
schedule-
definitely,
schedule Time between now and when we
Yeah,
present.
Max and I already talked about it. And before I leave today, we're going to set a time up. So we can, by the time it goes to the TPB, be in a good place. But just right now, today, we're not. That's all.
Seeing no additional discussion, let's take a vote. All those in favor of endorsing this, moving it forward to the TBB, please say aye. All those opposed?
No.
All right, the motion does pass with 2 noes. One additional note down there, Marty. Okay, next item, we're out of the action items, down to item 4, first item 4A, informational items. Requested amendment by TDOT to the Regional Transportation Plan and for the choice lanes. Choice lanes coming back to us again. So our regional transportation plan, let's see, Michael Skipper is taking care of this one for us. So
Thank you,
Michael, take it
Chair.
away.
I will get this on the table. I do want to acknowledge we have folks from TDOT here. Rebecca, the project manager, is sitting behind me. You interfaced with her at these meetings, and so she can answer any questions you have about the project description and what's being asked of us by TDOT. But the short of it is, what you need to know is that TDOT is developing a choice lanes project along I-24. It's a regionally significant route. The proposed improvements need to be reflected in our regional transportation plan before money can be programmed to the transportation improvement program. They have asked us to program funds, state dollars, for preliminary engineering and design, environmental review, and right-of-way acquisition for fiscal years 2025 and 2026. First step in facilitating that request is to amend the plan. So we've engaged TDOT in a conversation about the project description, the full build-out cost, and the source of revenue for that full cost so that we can present that to the board. We'll do an initial presentation to the board at their November 20th meeting. No action will be requested of them, but we will be on schedule to ask for an adoption hearing in January. I'll come back to the schedule in a minute. So let me look. The next slide here is the project description, which I'm not going to read to you. I think TDOT has done a really good job so far providing the latest information about their concept that they proposed along the I-24 corridor. Obviously, as they get into engineering, the concept will become more specific and subject to change and revision as they go through that process. And then there'd be an opportunity for the developers who bid on the project to also weigh in on design. But this is the general description for the concept that's been proposed. They are looking at a $3.7 billion project that would be paid through from revenues generated by user fees along the corridor. Any amount of funding that isn't sourced from those user fees would be essentially augmented by funds allocated through the Transportation Modernization Act for P3 projects. So there's no, at this point, any anticipation of federal funds being used on this project. I'm sure TDOT would let us know if that changed as we need to accommodate that in the plan and the TIP. So $3.7 billion total project cost. It is listed in the 10-year plan that TDOT presented last year as the Nashville Interstate 24 corridor priority investment. It's not currently in the TIP, but come January, we will be asking the board to amend the TIP to include funding for $242.8 million of state revenue for PE, design, NEPA, right-of-way acquisition over the course of fiscal year 25 and 26. Next slide, Taylor. And so this is the schedule, initial presentation to you all in terms of what the request from TDOT is. Again, we can entertain questions about the project the design concept. Folks from TDOT are in the room. November 20th will be our initial presentation to the board. We'll ask TDOT to present themselves the project description and the request to the board. Our staff will present information about the process that we'll use to get to the January adoption hearing. December 4th, we'll come back to you all. We have scheduled with TDOT, a P3 work session. So that'll be an opportunity for you to ask additional questions about this specific project. We do hope that work session is more broadly focused on TDOT's approach to the P3 program that was created through the Transportation Modernization Act. It won't be limited to the I-24 corridor, but it will be a chance for you to ask any questions that you have at that date. And then we will be asking for your endorsement to release the proposed amendments for public review and comment. So we can go through the required comment period before getting to the January Transportation Policy Board on January 15th. So that is the staff presentation this morning. Just want to let you know we received that request from TDOT and we began the process to facilitate those amendments.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions?
The workshop, you know yet?
Yes, sir. It'll be TCC, a regular TCC meeting. We'll want to probably gavel in for a little bit of business, but adjourn fairly quickly to get into that work session. And we'll likely invite some of the mayors on the Transportation Policy Board that have expressed interest in digging into the details for the P3 projects. But we'll make sure that we can accommodate everybody in this room. That will also be streaming. So if you have a mayor who is interested in following along, they'll be able to participate that way as well.
Michael, I might add, I don't want to steal TDOT's thunder. I know there's a meeting with the modernization board this afternoon. I don't know if it's worth mentioning to the group.
So the Transportation Modernization Board, which is a mixture of legislative and elected appointees, they will be meeting today at 1 o'clock. It will be live streamed. They have 2 items on the agenda. This is the second meeting that they have held, but the items on the agenda is just the approval of the actual processing of user fees and administrative fees that are associated with that. They will also be voting on the habitual violator policy, which specifically just lays out what a habitual violator is and the actions that the department can then take in order to recoup that cost of those violations.
All right, next informational item, annual obligations, federal fiscal year 2024. Taylor Lee's back to talk to us about that.
Thank you. So I have a few slides here. Can I go over the metrics first before we kind of dive in, tell you where you can download the actual obligations. So this is a graph here showing our FHWA obligations. As a note, we have roughly $370 million obligated between FTA and FHWA last year. So 307 million of that were federal highway obligations. So you see here that is high at least since 2010. So kind of following that trend besides COVID, kind of on that trend line. Our FTA obligations were roughly $62 million in 2024. So kind of I guess a good rebound from the previous year. So a good mix of capitalization operating costs as well. And our suballocated, so this year was the highest we've ever had. So we had roughly $51 million of suballocated funding obligated. Locally funded projects had closer to, I think, $55 million. You include those, let's say, sources like CMAQ, or if they had a state SPG source on there. So roughly $54 million total for local projects. So we had roughly 37 local projects for that amount. So, but of that 54, about $51,341,394 was obligated from our suballocated sources this year. In addition to that, if you look in the obligation report, you'll notice we talked about our funding swap. The last, I think there's about 6 or 7 TDOT projects off the top of my head that went there. They are classified as USTBG. They're not included in the suballocated in this graph right here. So I want a more accurate representation of kind of these locally funded projects suballocated, but they did obligate. Matt, I'll kind of hand off to you, but like they obligate a large amount of money this year through the swap.
With the help of you all and entering into this agreement to do swap, as well as some of the other larger MPOs, we were able to receive probably the largest August redistribution that we've had to date, over $300 million. So thank you all for that. I think it will be, this is something that I think might be a cycle that we start looking at to try to make sure that money's still moving, and that gives us that opportunity to have more availability for August redistribution. So thank you.
And was roughly about $85 million.
You're from
No,
Nash-
yeah, I believe so, somewhere in that range. So a large amount of that was Middle Tennessee, of the overall 300 million. So the listing of annual obligations is available for download on our website. It's this is all the categories and the sort features you'll be able to see. So everything from county to phase to obligation amount and date. So that is available on our website for download. And then I've also included the tip status reports. As you see, halfway through the tip is our last obligation was September 30th, end of the fiscal year. 51% obligation and 50% time pass. So we're on track right now, 51% to kind of meet the amount of federal obligation for the FHWA funds programmed. Some notes here, if you look into the obligations, so you'll see the large, the 173% obligation rate for STVG. So that includes some of our swap dollars there for the state funds. And then as well for our going down to our obligations, the USTVG $47.2 million was obligated last year compared to this last fiscal year. The previous year was under $5 million obligated USTVG. So we saw a large jump there. A lot of those are thanks to McEwen and Franklin, and then we had Walton Ferry on the tip amendments today for Hendersonville. But also, if you go here, it's 2 pages of obligations that go through. So let's see here. The link for the download is if you go to www.gnrc.org/transportation. I think it's just that, and you'll find the link to find the download link for the annual obligation list.
If you want to navigate to the tip page, the programs, investments, but it'll be very obvious once you get there.
The service Franklin offers, we're glad to help obligate federal funds. Yeah, anything you got to give us, we'll be glad to. Thank you, Tyler. Any questions? All right. Move on to the next informational items, EPA revision of PM 2.5 standards. Mark Corrigan, TDEC.
Mr. Chair, committee members, apologies on the front end. After a bout with COVID beginning in early October, my voice is not quite back yet. So apologies for that. Today, I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk with you about EPA's revised PM 2.5 NAAQS. The National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, for PM 2.5 were revised. I'd like to then tell you a little bit about where we are with respect to the design value or the statistic that EPA uses to determine if an area is meeting or not meeting the new standard, some of the milestones in that process, and potential implications for the national area. So if we could go on to the next slide. As a reminder, back on February 7th, EPA published in the Federal Register a notice strengthening the PM 2.5 or fine particulate matter National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or NAAQS, from a level of 12 micrograms down to a level of 9 micrograms per cubic meter. EPA did retain all the other PM NAAQS. This became effective on May 6th, which started a series of Clean Air Act required milestones, which are summarized in part on the next slide. So the key thing to note here is that the next big milestone for us is for the state to make recommendations to EPA on those areas that we believe are not meeting the new National Ambient Air Quality Standards and those areas that are meeting that standard. And we have to do that by February 7th of next year. Then sometime in the fall of next year, EPA will provide their response to the states. On the previous slide still, EPA will provide their response to the states as to what EPA believes those non-attainment areas should be, as well as offer an opportunity for the public to comment. States will be able to revise any of their recommendations before EPA makes their final determination on or before February 6th of 2026. So the question I know you're asking is, what does our design value, what does our air quality look like with respect to the new standard? And so on the next slide, in the next to the last column, you'll notice there are design values for the 2021 to 2023 timeframe. The design value, or that statistic that EPA uses to determine if an area is meeting or not meeting the standard, is a 3-year average. You'll note that a couple of the lines there representing monitors around the state are highlighted in orange, include 2 of them here in Davidson County. Those in orange are above a level of 9 micrograms per cubic meter, but if you scroll down to the near to the bottom table, you'll notice that there's another monitor in Sumner County that is actually meeting the new revised NAAQS. Something important to note, this is 2021 to 2023 data. This is the most recent information we have, and this is also likely the data that the state will make its recommendation to EPA on. However, based on that schedule we were just looking at, when EPA makes their final designations, if the schedule holds and there's not a change for whatever reason, litigation or whatever, EPA will have 2024 data. So EPA will be actually looking at the timeframe 2022 to 2024. So the picture could change for better or for worse based on that. But this is the latest information that we have. Another caveat that I need to provide, as I guess a reminder on this slide, is that state and local air agencies can make exceptional event demonstrations to EPA if we believe that there were certain events that had an undue influence on air quality for a particular time frame. We can petition EPA to potentially exclude that data from the design value calculation. Specific exceptional events that EPA will consider are wildfires, large wildfires, and you'll recall hearing in the news last couple of years about large wildfires in Canada or the Western United States, or more locally, large controlled burns. We are working with the Department of Health, their Air Pollution Control Agency, to put together a demonstration of some of these events to the EPA for EPA's ultimate consideration of whether some of these days can be excluded from the design value calculation. I don't know yet if there were a significant number of events yet to influence the design value to bring it down below the level of the NAAQS. Time will tell. And of course, we also don't know if EPA will agree with our determinations. But that exceptional event demonstration is being put together right now. And as the next slide shows, I think we'll have to have that EPA by February 7th of next year. This is just a reminder that and at the very bottom there, EPA will actually be looking at the 2022 to 2024 design values. So sometime next year before September, we'll also take a careful look at the events in 2024. If there were events that influenced particulate matter, readings such that, they were unduly influenced by outside events like wildfires that are beyond our control, we'll also submit those exceptional event demonstrations for calendar year 2024. When EPA published in the Federal Register the new NAAQS, they issued this memo to states to remind us of the process that they undertake to make designations. there's an excerpt on the next slide that reminds us when EPA makes designations. If there's a monitor in a geographic area that's reading above the standard, EPA's presumptive starting point for the geographic extent of the non-attainment area is the CSA or the CBSA. And then from that, they look at a number of factors. We'll list them in a later slide as to what EPA may use to consider adding counties to the potential non-attainment area or removing counties. As shown on the next slide, the CSA for Nashville is from state border to state border. So this is where EPA would start and then add or remove counties as it's examined to see whether or not these additional counties are an influence on our PM 2.5 air quality issues. So on the next slide, I've listed out these factors that EPA will consider. Of course, the most important is the air quality. If you have a non-attaining monitor, of course, then you have to go through this process. If the larger geographic area has all attaining monitors, then it's a much easier call. So when EPA and the state, when we make our recommendations, we start looking at which areas to include or exclude from the potential non-attainment area. We'll look at emissions data, meteorology, geography, jurisdictional boundaries, any other factors that we can consider, like is a county or a community adjacent to the major urban core, economically or socially connected to the urban core, Nashville. How are our surrounding communities tied back to Nashville? Are they bedroom communities? Is there a lot of commuting? Basically, do we think that they contribute to the overall air quality issues that we're facing here in the greater Nashville area? So a little bit more detail on the next slide just gives you a little bit more information on the emissions related data that we'll look at to kind of evaluate some of these counties outside of Davidson County to see, does it need to be a part of the non-attainment area or not? PM 2.5 speciation. Fortunately, we don't have one of those kinds of monitors in the Nashville area that would allow us to send the sample to the lab where they could actually evaluate the makeup of the PM 2.5. We don't have that type of monitor here in Nashville, but we would still look at some of the other activity factors like population growth, VMT, vehicle activity, and anything else that might help us to determine whether another county needs to be a part of the non-attainment area or not. So ultimately, on the next slide, the state will recommend and EPA will have to determine whether counties will be classified as non-attainment, not meeting the standard, attainment / unclassifiable, which basically means they attain the standard. And rarely does EPA use the unclassifiable designation. It's usually used if there's not enough data or information to make a determination. So that determination is delayed till a later date, till there's more information. So that's the ultimate decision that EPA will be making. That's what we'll be looking for on or before, February 6, 2026. Implications potentially for the Nashville area. I've got a couple of them here on this slide. I won't talk much about these because these are more permitting related that I really don't work with. But prevention of significant deterioration is an evaluation of a major facility, an auto plant, a power plant. When they look to expand or build, it's actually in effect now. But because the level of the standard was lowered, that threshold gets a little bit more challenging. Should the area be designated non-attainment, then the hurdle gets even more difficult because then the area is subject to non-attainment new source review, which makes it very difficult for a large facility car plant, a power plant, something else to be able to expand without potentially having to find offset elsewhere. But it's really the third item on the next slide. Excuse me. That I wanted to talk to you about. And looking around the table, there's not many faces that I recognize that might have been around in 2008 and previous. But at one time, the Nashville area was subject to transportation conformity requirements for ozone. Those requirements also exist for PM 2.5 or fine particulates. Should the area be designated non-attainment, it would require us, the MPO, to make a demonstration with TDOT to our federal partners, to the state, to the EPA, and the Federal Highway Administration that the totality of the emissions in the non-attainment area from transportation do not exceed some limits. And those limits will depend on various things. So we'll have to make that demonstration to the Federal Highway Administration to keep those dollars flowing. It goes into effect 12 months after designation. 12 months sounds like a long time, but it really isn't. So if it looks imminent that the national area is going to become non-attainment, we would probably kick off that process a little bit early. In addition, the transportation conformity requirements will also reset our MTP update clock from a 5-year cycle to a 4-year cycle. And unfortunately, unlike non-attainment new source review, which only applies when the area is non-attainment, when we get back to an attaining level, non-attainment new source review goes away, but transportation conformity does not. It hangs around for 20 years throughout the maintenance period that exists after an area goes back into attainment. Unlike transportation conformity requirements that we had for ozone, PM 2.5 has yet an additional requirement. That's called a hotspot analysis. This is an analysis that applies to areas or projects maybe that have an influence potentially from a lot of diesel vehicles, like highway expansions, freight terminals, large intersections with a lot of diesel traffic that have a low level of service, bus terminals and things like that. If they are large enough and potentially have enough influence on PM emissions, they may have to undergo yet a more localized, detailed analysis of those emissions. So those are the things that we potentially could face in the near future. Again, you saw the latest PM data that we have. 2024 data is not yet complete, so we don't know what that picture looks like. Values could change up or down. Exceptional events are something we're working on, but for sure we can't say that there were enough events to bring those design values down, and we don't know if EPA would approve them. So kind of we're in this limbo right now. If the picture changes, we get new data, I'll be glad to share that. But this is kind of where we are with respect to the new PM 2.5 NACs. And Mr. Chair, I'll be glad to entertain any questions.
Is the current data available online that you presented?
For 2021 to 2023, yes, EPA has a website where you can actually go and look at some of that data.
Any other questions?
A question and a comment, but I don't want to get in front of anybody else from the committee. Any questions? My question is just to repeat that date, that February 6th, 2026, the date of determination. Or is that what you said? Okay, and then
Under the Clean Air Act requirements, 2 years from when EPA promulgates a new NACs, they have to make designations. So based on the Clean Air Act schedule, February 6th of 2026 when EPA actually has to publish that.
and it's the 12-month conformity requirement is 12 months from that date.
12 months from the effective date of that Federal Register notice. So usually there's a 60 or 90-day period roughly when the Federal Register notice will be published to its effective date. So 12 months from that effective date usually is when those transportation conformity requirements would kick in. But what it would mean for us is that we would have to not only have put together that demonstration and submit it to the Federal Highway Administration, but they would have to make a determination on it before that 12-month clock ends, such that then the federal dollars can keep coming to this area.
And so just thinking about that date in comparison with our deadline for plan adoption for our 5-year plan update as it currently is by March of 2026. So something for us to be considering. Some of us are some of those faces around that room that do remember maintenance. Matt and I were on staff together when we had to demonstrate conformity with the long range plan, and it is a lot of additional work. The good news is though, we are going to get a little bit ahead of this. We are the EPA designated entity for the climate pollution reduction grant program for the Nashville MSA, and we've expanded the GRV to include a few additional counties that are also in the GNRC footprint, to include Montgomery, for example. And so as part of that, we're required by EPA to develop a comprehensive climate action plan that forecasts emissions from each of the sectors, including transportation. Will be focused on our strategies for reducing emissions from the transportation sector as part of our regional transportation plan update itself. There's a mostly focused on greenhouse gas emissions, which PM 2.5 isn't directly attributable, but there are components of particular matter that do contribute to global warming. So we'll probably end up folding into the work that we're doing for EPA as part of that process, with the anticipation of going in a direction of potential conformity requirement for the RTP. So we'll be, obviously staffing up and building the tools to be able to make us in the position to be able to demonstrate a conformity should that become a requirement. I appreciate the presentation today, and fingers crossed we don't go back.
Anything you can do to help air quality. I didn't include a slide on ozone, but just yesterday, I got the final ozone numbers for this last ozone season. Last couple ozone seasons, our ozone numbers have ticked up just a little bit. In fact, based on preliminary data, the ozone standard is 70 parts per billion. We have a monitor in the Nashville area with this preliminary data, 3-year design value, including 2024. That's sitting right at 70 parts per billion. Another one that's at 69 parts per billion. Another one that's at 68 parts per billion. Ozone values have gone up around the state. Knoxville has a monitor, I think, at 68 parts per billion. So does Chattanooga. Memphis has 4 monitors that are well above the standard. So ozone is rearing its ugly head, so to speak. And so anything that you can do. And I think the MPO staff will talk a little bit about this in a couple more minutes. There's, for example, some CMAQ projects. There's a bunch of obligated dollars. If there's something you can do to move that CMAQ project out and get it on the ground sooner, that would help. Anything you can do along those lines, we need all the help we can get. It would really be to our benefit. Everyone would breathe easier if we can bring down the pollution levels a little bit to stay below the ozone and the PM 2.5 max. So anything you can do is appreciated.
Actually, one question, unless someone wants to jump in front of me. For Sean, I know that in East Tennessee, they have PM 2.5 designations where is it additional CMAQ dollars, or is it just they have to designate a certain percentage of the state's allocation towards PM 2.5 areas for the CMAQ dollars?
It's a set aside of CMAQ,
Okay.
CMAQ funding. Yeah, so I don't know that I would call it necessarily additional funding, but we do have a dedicated portion of our CMAQ allocation that does go to PM 2.5 improving projects within our PM 2.5 maintenance.
That's probably putting the cart in front of the horse, because it's, a couple of years of just thinking that. Is CRP going to fall under the carbon reduction program?
That's currently
Okay.
Structured. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Mark. We'll move on to the regular reports. FHWA, we'll move right back to Sean.
Sure, thank you. So as of October 1, we are in a new federal fiscal year. So we have issued apportionment notices for new federal funding for FY25. Tennessee is receiving $1.2 billion in formula funding. Unfortunately, because we are under a continuing resolution, this board, I think, has been educated quite a bit on obligation limitation and all those finance-related topics. And so we are under a situation where Tennessee only has access to about a quarter of our obligation authority or obligation limitation. So we can't quite make use of that full $1.2 billion in funding that we have available at this point. But hopefully we'll see an extension of that continuing resolution or see something there to be able to get access to that additional obligation limitation. And then just wanted to mention a couple of grant opportunities that are on the street. Protect is a grant program that's related to resilience improvement projects. We fund both planning and capital projects with that. We just released a notice of funding opportunity for $876 million to be announced across for projects using funding in FY24, 25, and 26. So we have webinars scheduled for that notice of funding opportunity for next month. I believe I've sent that to the staff, but if not, we'll send that over to you, Taylor, for distribution to the board. And we are accepting applications for any resilience improvement projects, again, planning or capital, through February 24th of 2025. And then our RAISE program, this is kind of our longest discretionary program, pretty broad eligibility for projects of regional and local significant impact. We also fund planning and capital projects through this one. We just released a NOFO for that one, releasing $1.5 billion for applicant projects. How this one's going to work is the DOT is going to be reaching out to previous applicants from our FY24 cycle that would have rated high but did not get selected for the previous cycle. Assess whether or not those applicants would like to be considered for this new round of funding, and then any remaining funding that is still available after that process will be available to applications for new projects. Was talking with Missy this project. Her June Lake at I-65 interchange was funded through this program several years ago. So for anyone that's interested, we are going to be accepting those new applications for the program through January 30th of 2020. And that's all I had.
What was the date on that?
January 30th.
Thanks, sir.
Yep.
All right, any questions for Sean? All right. Move on to the report from TDOT. And I don't see Stacy here, so I'm assuming it goes on to Mr. Matt.
Yes, that would be me. My last name?
Matt Masori.
One thing I wanted to mention is staff might have brought it up at previous TCC meetings, but I know I brought it up at the last board meeting. We are getting close to kicking off our long-range transportation plan, our 30-year policy plan for the most part. We are in the process of procuring a consultant, but we wanted to get in front of it and I really wanted to concentrate on engagement as being a core component of this. So we've actually released a survey in advance of the plan. It can be found on our website. If you Google TDOT planning, you should be able to find it. I think the second link down. So that is open. I know we forwarded the link to the MPO, and I don't know if they've distributed it or not to you all, but if you want to circumvent that, you can go to our website and do that. That's really the only thing I had. Yeah, I think that's all I had thought about.
Thank you, Matt. Move on to the chair's report. I have nothing, so I'm filling in for Josh. Move on to the staff report.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll take your time then.
All right.
I do have a few important updates for you all this morning. First this is more of a reminder, and then also a heads up that we should be hearing soon on the application that we submitted to USDOT's Safe Streets for All program back in August. November 13th is in my head as the date of announcement, but somewhere around there. And we've gotten a few inquiries on whether or not we'd be willing to take a little bit less money. So maybe that is a good sign, but we did propose a $2 million project that would have three activities. We worked with the TCC and the TPB to develop the pitch to USDOT, and you can learn more about this by reading the application directly. It's available online at gnrc.org/SS4A. So I won't go into detail there, but just hopefully, fingers crossed that we hear good news in the next couple of weeks to be able to launch a quick build safety improvement program across Middle Tennessee. Few additional staff updates. One is, spoiler alert, Daniel McDonald with TDOT, Multimodal Planning Manager, will be joining our staff as our Director of Transportation Infrastructure December 2nd, I believe is your first day, Daniel. That's right. So we're so excited to have Daniel joining our team. He'll be responsible if we should get this grant from the SS4A program to help us stand up the quick build program. Very similar work to what you've been doing at TDOT. Also, your planning background will help us make sure that we stay on schedule with an update to the regional transportation plan. We are also recommending Daniel to serve in the role of MPO coordinator. And so we'll be working with their planning oversight committee on November 15th to send him through the ringer to ensure their comfort level with that. So stay tuned, but excited to have Daniel join our staff. A few other updates for you all. As I just mentioned, we're in the process of updating our regional transportation plan. I think we've previously mentioned to you a few times that we'll do the call for projects for that process in the first quarter, the calendar year 2025. So January through March is when we'll be asking for your submission of applications for funding through the RTP, which would extend through the planning horizon of 2050. So it'll be program funds for fiscal years 2026 through 2050. So be thinking about that, but there's a lot of technical work that we've got to do in addition to evaluating your projects for anticipated federal funds. And to help us with that, we've onboarded in the last couple of weeks 4 consulting teams, one led by CDM Smith, one led by Kimberly Horn, another led by Banesh, and the last team led by, should have written it down, CDM Smith, Kimberly Horn, and they're probably listening online.
Feel ya.
Kimberly Horn, CDM Smith, Banesh, and
You couldn't ask me to know.
yeah, I know. It rolls off the tongue.
Large, Neil Schaefer.
Nelson Nygaard, there you go.
Okay,
Got there, yes. But together, those 4 primes bring about 30 firms, ranging everything from engineering analysis to long-range planning to data and research to community outreach and marketing and so on and so forth. So we have a really good team of consultants, great, with apologies to Nelson Nygaard there, that we've onboarded. We've actually began seeking invitations to respond to some task orders, namely updating our bike ped level service and lane demand modeling, as an example. Also getting some assistance with finalizing the coordinated human services transportation plan, but we'll also be using them to update cost estimates for you all for projects that haven't had any engineering done or any engineering done recently, so that we can go ahead and get that work out of the way. We have good cost estimates even as we go into the call for projects. So we'll be talking with you all more about not only the task orders that we're issuing, but entertaining any suggestions or ideas that you have for things that we want to direct the consultants to help us out with. And so that'll be an opportunity for y'all to be proactive in shaping that work. Want to let you know about a couple of awards that we received. As you all know, we staff the MPO. We're also the Economic Development District. We're also the Area Agency on Aging. And so in our other roles, we do from time to time get awarded some additional competitive funds. We were awarded by EDA a $392,000 grant to help launch a long-term disaster recovery program for communities that have been part of disaster declarations over the last few years, which is quite a few communities across Middle Tennessee. And in this role, what we'll be doing is helping those communities, primarily rural communities, but any community would be eligible to kind of review their local land use policies, zoning ordinances, subdivision regulations, building codes, just to make sure that the things that we're planning for and constructing are more resilient, less vulnerable to disaster. And then in instances when we identify a project that needs to be rebuilt, making sure that it gets designed appropriately. And then if there is a lack of funding to move that project forward, this will fund our grant writers to help those communities pursue state and federal grants to get those projects built. We'll also be doing a community self-assessment toolkit to help communities sort of self-assess their resiliency and provide some resources to help them get in front of the next disaster, which is unfortunately inevitable. We also awarded $220,000 by the Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation to develop brownfield site inventories across 13 counties. We're going to be doing 11 ourselves and then working with the 2 additional counties to develop these inventories. And then we're going to, we pitched the idea to them to then combine those inventories into an online mapping portal. So everybody has information about where the brownfield sites are across Middle Tennessee that might be suitable for redevelopment. Of course, if it is a brownfield site, first step is identifying it as such. And then second step, and there would be funding from TDEC to do this, is to investigate the degree of contamination, the necessity for cleanup. And then the third step would be that remediation. TDEC will also make money available for remediation to get those sites back on the market. For redevelopment, these are obviously underutilized sites that probably have good infrastructure, water, sewer, power already provided to them. So they're a good opportunity for development over greenfield sites within your community. So we'll be working with you all on that initiative over the next 6 to 8 months. And then we don't often talk about our role as the Area Agency on Aging and Disability at the TCC meetings. I think we've talked about it in the context of the Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan that we're doing. But you all either have staff or are coming across constituents in the community that may be nearing the retirement age. And just to remind you, in the role as the AAAD for Middle Tennessee, we are the federally funded source of unbiased, non-commissioned information about Medicare. It is open enrollment, so just keep this in the back of your mind as you're back home in your communities. Your mayors are very familiar with the work that we do here, but this is a great opportunity to address issues of affordability within your communities. There are a lot of plan changes that are being that are manifesting in this cycle, so the volume for those who need assistance with the open enrollment is very high. And, there are good places to go for guidance and there are not so good places to go for guidance. And we're the federally supported program in Middle Tennessee to help folks in your community make decisions about Medicare. And then lastly, I think you all know about our volunteer program. We use volunteers in a lot of the aging disability services that we deliver, but we've also used volunteers in planning and economic development initiatives as well. One of our more popular initiatives, the way we engage volunteers across Middle Tennessee, started during the pandemic when we began writing letters to older adults across Middle Tennessee who may otherwise feel isolated. And we hit a huge milestone a few weeks ago where we sent out our 100,000th, that's hard to say, letter to Middle Tennesseans. So just, yeah.
That's excellent.
Super proud of the team. And I mean, they do a lot of great work with volunteers. Good opportunity too for you to direct constituents to volunteer opportunities at gnrc.org/volunteer. We have a really fantastic portal that has job postings for volunteers, and we do a good job of getting them onboarded through our volunteer manager, whose name is Rebecca Nofi. I like to say that name anytime I can. So additional updates from us. I think I'll close on a look at upcoming meetings. We mentioned the Transportation Policy Board that is scheduled for November 20th. This is going to be at the downtown Nashville Library. We encourage you to join us, but equally important, please help your mayor, spot that location change. I know we play musical chairs a lot with those board meetings, and sometimes we have folks just going on autopilot to the wrong location. So please, we'll do everything that we can to make sure that they're aware of the location change. But that is the Downtown Nashville Library. Pretty important agenda. We'll be doing the initial presentation of the plan amendment, but also continued conversations about the revisions to the functional classification map as well. December 6th will be. Is that date right, Taylor? I think it's the 4th. December 4th is the next TCC meeting. It'll be a fairly abbreviated meeting so that we can then adjourn into that work session with TDOT on the P3 program. December 9th, we haven't announced this broadly yet, but we are about to send out RSVP emails to our annual partnership event, which will be held December 9th. This year, we are looking at an awards reception at the Johnny Cash from 4 to 6. Last year's event was at the City Winery, where we had Governors Bredesen and Haslam talk with our members and partners about their podcast.
Great event.
It was, and that podcast is fantastic if you haven't It's you might be right is the name of that, and just Google that and you'll get access to
Yes,
just a
ma'am.
really great conversation between those two governors who are on both sides of the um, political spectrums. So December 9th, that's a save the date, but you'll get something from us to get RSVP to that event. Love to have you there. And then our last formal meeting of one of our bodies for the year will be on December 11th. Our regional council body will convene. We'll talk a little bit more about the disaster recovery program that I just mentioned. We'll kick that off with our members. We'll also be presenting an annual update to our comprehensive economic development strategy, which is the Department of Commerce requirement that's similar to the DOT's requirement for transportation plan. So this is sort of a gateway to federal investments and infrastructure and programs to help with workforce development and job creation, job retention. And then finally, as we always do at these meetings, just making sure everybody's aware of the myriad of grant opportunities that are out there through the variety of state and federal agencies that have funding right now to help improve your communities. With that, Mr. Chair.
You sure? Nothing else? All right, thank you, Michael. You do have a lot today, so you do need the extra time.
Thank you for that.
Not a problem. All right, is there any other business to come before this committee? Not seeing any, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, you're adjourned. Thank you all. I just want to know, every time I come every time the mayor asks me to come to a TPB meeting in his stead, it seems like now we're at the library instead. Have I been shadow banned from the archive building and just don't know it?
Leave your name tags on the table, please.
It'll be a great opportunity.
Give me a signature.
Or not.